Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. This is Pat McPherson. We are today talking with Gillian Stewart. It's October 9th, 2023. We're doing this on Zoom. So Susan Creighton is at her house in Brattleboro, Vermont. I am in Montague, Mass. And Gillian is in
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Where?
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that was Gillian's voice. This interview is about Gillian's time as a dancer and organizer on the Marlboro Morris Ale in Marlboro, Vermont. The interview is going to be part of the Marlboro Ale Archive, which will reside at the Vermont Folklife Center, currently in Middlebury, Vermont, and imminently in Burlington, Vermont. All right. Hi, Gillian.
And today is October 9th, 2023.
I said that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's up, Gillian.
Uh-oh. Pat, you froze there for a sec.
Am I back?
Yes.
Now
back. Hey.
Yes.
So we start all these interviews with a little bit of background. Mm-hmm. So if you want to just start yakking at us, that's great. We are always interested in when and how and where people started dancing in general, and then Morris dancing or rapper or sword specifically. So how about you?
So I was lucky enough to grow up contra dancing and English dancing. My parents met at a contra dance at the Central Square YMCA in 1986. And then I was born in 88. So I grew up, my mom would call, my dad was often running sound for events, and I would get taken on little mini East Coast tours and put to sleep underneath a piano in a, carrier or in a pack and play or something. So some of my earliest memories of dancing are from when I was old enough to walk. My dad would get me up to do circles and stars with the couples out at the end of the line while the dance was going on. So that's always been part of my life, social dance and contra dancing in particular. And then when I got a little bit older, my folks would take me to NEFA, which was at that point in Natick. And they would, when I was like 6, 7, 8, they would start parking me out front at the outdoor courtyard to watch Morris dancing, just as a like, okay, great, you can hang out here. We're going to go do a medley. Here's 5 people, right? Like, what am I going to do? Sit there and watch some folk dancing. So I would sit and watch, and they would leave, then they would come back, and I would get a little older, and they would start leaving me with $5 to run into the cafeteria to get a sandwich if I needed to. And so I had a lovely time hanging out outside and watching Morris dancing. And then they were shocked when I was 8 or 9 and told them that I wanted to start Morris dancing, which neither of them had ever really done. I'd gone to, right about in that same time frame, I'd also grown up going to Pinewoods for first weekend and Labor Day. And there was some Morris, but mostly I was excited about rapper at that age. And so Michael Resnick was often running a little intro rapper class, particularly at Labor Day. And we would, Leora and Heather and a couple of other folks in my generation and I would try and talk our way into the class because he had listed as 10 and up, as was, I'm sure, very responsible of him. And then we asked, well, like, why can't we do it? And he was like, well, you're not strong enough. Well, anyway, so at some point he really settled on his excuse being that we weren't strong enough to bend the swords. At which point we promptly took some of the swords and proved our grip strength.
Knowing the 3 of you, I can just imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and he was too honorable to go back on his word. And so we hopped into a set and learned to do some rapper, which was really fun. And then when I was about 10, I finally convinced my parents that I wanted to do more of this during the year. So they looked around and found out that Banbury Cross would take 10-year-olds. The timing was right, or I was free on Wednesday nights. So my dad would start driving me out to Newton to go to Banbury practice, which was great. So I started dancing there and then going to a bunch of the different Morris gigs in the Boston area as part of the team. And after a few years, he got bored of driving me to all the Morris events and decided that if he was going to be there, he might as well join a Morris team. So he joined Newtown because he was tired of going to the things and not dancing. So he joined Newtown. And then when I was 12, 12, I heard about, and I think Susan, you might actually have been involved in this. There was Revels was doing an Appalachian show, and they were looking for a teenage clog team. And so I was like, oh, I know how to do a little bit of that. And so I tried out for that and was in that show. And at the end of that, and made friends with a bunch of folks who were a couple of years older than I was. And at the end of the show, they said, well, like, oh, well, why don't you come to the teenage Morris team that we're on, right? You can do that too. It's on Sundays. And so I got pulled along to that. And the first time I showed up for that practice, they were like, well, we have a rapper gig in 2 weeks and you already know how to do rapper. So why don't you be two and we'll go and do that. And that was that.
Which team was this?
It was Team X at that point. It turned into Great Meadows, so Tom Kruskel's team. Okay. And then Candy Rapper was like, well, we need number 2 for this, so you're joining. So I did that. And then eventually I ended up joining Muddy River a couple of years later when my mother could be persuaded of the fact that all of the dirty joke telling ladies on Muddy River would not corrupt me, that I was old enough to already know about those dirty jokes. And and my first time going to Marlboro was in 2000, and I just pulled this up, 2003 with Great Meadows, which I think was actually the first time that Great Meadows was invited. Was a really, so Great Meadows was mixed, right? People of all genders dancing together. And it was a teenage team, right? A youth team. And both of those were firsts at that point for Marlboro, as far as I know. And so there was Ooh, tell me more.
Well, later on, we'll tell you about the teenage team that came in 1977, including teenage Rhett Krause.
Okay.
But there was a very long gap, and then then Great Meadows was
Anyway, so it was part of that. Yes.
And if you're listening to this interview, you should really go listen to Rhett Krause's interview because he talks all about this first experience. So
nice. So I went in 2003 because that was what the team was doing, and it was wonderful. And we went as a team for a bunch of years. And then after, let's see what happened. Went as a bunch of years with Great Meadows, and then with Muddy River as well as Great Meadows. And then I graduated from high school and went off to college in Western Mass. And a couple of years into college, got asked to join the committee. I think mostly because they realized that the entire committee was over some age that involved some there was a large age gap between the population attending the ale and the population of people organizing the ale. And they looked around, and I'm not sure who they asked, but looked for a heavy air quotes, responsible young person. And somebody told them that I was. And so I joined the committee. I talked to Red about it and joined the committee. I think part of it was also because they were looking for somebody to help organize the feast and really work with the kitchen crew at the college. And I'd been at that point running the Pinewoods kitchen for a couple of years. So I had that kind of expertise.
What year was that? Do you recall? You said it was your sophomore year or junior year?
It was 2008.
What?
Yeah. Winter of 2008. So for the 2009 ale. According to my emails, which I do actually think are true. Yeah.
Since you are such a responsible person, I'm sure they are true.
I was frantically searching through my emails the moment that I hopped on Zoom. So
um, and since 2008 and joining the committee, have you been, when you were on the committee, you were still coming as a dancer as well?
Yep.
All the way through to now?
Yeah, so I joined Orion a couple of years, I think right when I started college, I joined Orion.
Okay.
And so I've been at the L with either Orion or Muddy pretty much every year. Maybe there was a year where where one of my teams went to some British event. I know the Sword Spectacular has sometimes been that weekend. So I think we did that one year. But other than that, yeah. And then I was on the L committee from 2009 through 2019. At which point I decided that I had done enough organizing and I wanted to step off and enjoy the ale and really be a participant with too much of that. So 2019 was my last year. And then the ale didn't happen for another 2 years. So
right.
That was a bit of a bummer.
So when you first went to the ale, your parents hadn't been there because they weren't really dancers, more ritual dancers. So what were your earliest memories, say, of going to the ale as on that teenage team, mixed team among all those grown-ups?
I remember being delighted and intrigued, and I was a very rule following child, and being sort of perplexed about the fact that there were definitely some rules, but some of the rules were very clearly like people were like heavily like
wink wink,
yes, aggressively wink wink about it, and trying to figure out like, so we just get to like wander around and go wherever we want. Okay. It felt a little, I'd had some of those experiences, right? Because Pinewoods is a similar situation, right? You're there with a parent or a guardian, but like, as long as you stay on campus, that they don't care, be safe,
right?
Drink some water, show up for your show dance.
Right.
So it was fun. I remember it was the first time that I'd really seen pub singing. Like everybody smooshed into a room and that popcorn style of folks, just one person would lead a song and everyone sort of magically seemed to know it. And then another person would lead a song and everybody magically seemed to know it. And that was really sort of astounding and magical to me because I hadn't ever experienced that kind of thing. I'd done chorus or revels, right, where everyone sings, but people aren't, it's not impromptu in that way.
Right. What about your teammates?
It was a real mix. So some of my teammates on Great Meadows had grown up going. So like Erica Roderick had grown up going because her dad was on Pinewoods. And there were some other folks who had gone before. Amelia Mason, right, had grown up going with both of her folks and with her grandmother.
Right.
And so there were some people who had been there a bunch. Oh, Nathaniel Diamond Jones had grown up going with both of his folks. And so there was sort of maybe a third of us who had been before and knew what the sort of general take was. And so it was fun to follow them around. And then there were some folks whose parents were like very unclear on the entire thing. Like, we're just going to send, 18 teenagers off to a college campus in rural Vermont with a bunch of grown-ups and there's no, and you'll tell us how it goes. Interesting. And so some of them had various rules and some folks had cell phones, but they didn't actually work because it was, Marlboro at that point, and not everyone did because it was, 2003. And so.
Right. Who did?
Right. So there were some folks who were sort of scrambling around when they got downtown trying to find a payphone to call their parents to reassure them that everything was okay. And in fact, they had, sat around listening to people playing fiddle late, until midnight and then gone to bed, and it was really totally fine. But yeah, it was fun. And it was a really fun bonding experience because we'd all known each other. It's different from spending Sunday afternoons together to like sharing a bunch of tents and, running around Vermont for a weekend.
Yeah. Was that the beginning of, I can imagine, these really strong friendships then that still exist in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it's not totally overlapping, but I think Great Meadows had gone to the Sword Spectacular in Whitby the year before. I'm pretty sure we did that in 2002. And then we went to Marlboro in 2003. And so we'd had that kind of bonding experience, but that was like completely overwhelming for a lot of us. It was our first like transatlantic trip. And that felt like sort of a fever dream in a wonderful way. And Marlboro was the first time where I think a lot of us realized that this was something that you could just do your whole life together.
Oh, wow.
In a way that didn't really like Whitby felt too amazing. It was very clearly a one-time thing where Marlboro was like, oh, a lot of people do this every year and felt more real. Yeah. And it was wonderful. I'm still very close. I mean, I own a house with Erica and Natty, who were on both of those trips with me.
Right.
And I'm like looking over here. I found here, I'll drop it into the chat so you all can be amused by this. I found Great Western is a British team, and they were at the Ale in 2003. And I found this photo blog, and I'm just looking at the like group picture that one of Great Meadows that one of them took, and being like, oh yeah, I still talk to 80% of the people in this picture on a regular basis.
I'm just looking at it.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, somehow now I have lost my questions, but what the heck? I can deal.
Go off book.
Oh God, what should I say now? So you have been at the Ale as, a young teenager. You're saying you did say that you were a little younger than some of the people already. As a young teenager, young adult, and then as a responsible member of the committee and all that. And how has your experience changed over the years?
I think so I feel like there's sort of a like cartoon version of this, right? And like what it means to grow up, like as like the curse and the blessing of being an adult is that you can have ice cream for dinner, but then you have to deal with the repercussions of having ice cream for dinner. And I was having that
good summary of it right there.
Yeah. Right. So I was having that experience of growing up being like, this is like, there are all these amazing things in the world, but those things take work, right? To build and to create. And so I feel like I got that experience of the magic of having all of the things happen through those first 5 or 6 years that I was at Yale, of just sort of being like, this is incredible. This is wonderful. The world exists. The world is my oyster. The world is full of wonderful people and music and dancing and song and like that, like really magical feeling. And then at about the same age that I was like, oh, right. I took a gap year between high school and college, being like, oh, I have to feed myself. Oh gosh, I have to go to the grocery store on a regular basis, and then I have to cook the food if I want to eat the food. Oh gosh, was right about the time that I was joining the L committee and having that like, oh, you don't just show up somewhere and dance. You have to figure out who owns the property. You have to talk to them about permitting. You have to figure out what happens if it rains. You have to figure out how many people fit on the bus. Okay, how do we figure out how many people will be on the bus? Do we talk to the teams? Great. How do we, like, all of those logistical things, and learning about all that went into that was all sort of happening at that same time that I was learning to do that for myself in a funny way. And it was a really, I feel like let's see, I was also learning to run the kitchen at Pinewoods at the same time. And so
Right.
learning how to budget for events was something that happened as I was learning how to budget for myself. And having, right, like Rhett would draw up these, like 10-year retrospectives of like the overall ale financials, and being like, oh yeah, that is good to know how things look over the course of 10 years and how things change. Oh, I should probably do that for my own budget. No, that makes sense. And so I got to learn a lot about, in this really small group of really talented people who are the ale committee, about like, okay, what are the different ways of approaching this, like various different problems? What are the different tasks that go into organizing things, and how do you balance things out and share things out? And what are different ways that you could approach things? That was a very roundabout answer.
Hmm.
No, it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? When they expose the guy behind the curtain.
Yeah.
This is how the magic happens. There's a machine back here that is working
spinning wheels and pushing buttons, and
right. There's a machine back here behind the curtain. This is all the work that goes into it. And part of the interesting thing is, how do you keep the magic going for people while you still know how the thing is working?
Yeah.
And how,
there's a lot of different roles people can play on the ale committee in terms of where they plug into the organization of the ale. Did you come on to the committee with a specified role, or did you sort of find a role once you'd been on there for a while and thought, I would best plug in right here?
So I came on relatively intentionally, to do food and kitchen and feast stuff.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Because that was,
right. Familiar territory. Yep.
Familiar territory. And because I think John Ridgway was in the process of stepping off the committee at that point. And so he was like, I want to step off in the next few years, whoever comes on next. And nobody else on the committee was like, yes, I would love to run the feast in the kitchen.
Right.
Whoever comes on next should have that kind of background and experience. So I did that. And then the other sort of big project that I took on was registration. And that was mostly because I had a fair amount of experience through school and through work of using Google Forms and spreadsheets to organize things. And sort of as the ale was transitioning from, send us a Word document with a bunch of names of your team members written out, to people sign up using a web form, and that technology shift. Sarah Pilzer and I were pretty involved in doing that, partly because of age, and also because, we're both database nerds, and that came out of our sort of science education.
Right.
Did you have anything to do with the Youth Dance Weekend organization? Because I know Sarah was in on that as well.
So I've never been on the committee, but I ran the kitchen there for some number of years. So Sarah was on the committee for the first couple of years, and I went and helped her out, not at the first one, but at like the second and third ones. And then she stepped off the committee, and I said that I didn't want to join the committee, but I would do all the kitchen organizing. So I did that for a bunch of years.
Such a good skill.
I mean, yes, I'm going, no, like, man, I am just not that person.
It's a really particular set of skills, right?
It is.
Like,
It is.
I do know how to talk to, between 1 and 300 folk dancers about what they want to eat and when, and make sure that it happens.
I know. You're incredible.
It's
thank God for you. What else is on our question list, Susan?
Well, so you've been on the Ale Committee. It's 2018. You've been on the Ale Committee now for about 10 years. What do you remember about how the organization of the ale was evolving during that time?
Right.
Yeah. So at least part of let's see, one of the things was, as people were more and more comfortable with remote and sort of digital work and meetings, they started inviting people who weren't from Brattleboro and Marlboro to join the committee. So remote meetings became an option.
Right.
I joined the committee when I was living in Western Mass, but I stayed on when I moved back to Boston. And I think since I've been on the committee, there's been at least one person from the Boston area, as I think a lot of the sort of, there aren't that many teams. I mean, there's a shock given proportionally, there's a really high number of Morris teams in Brattleboro and Marlboro, but like not nearly as many as there are in Boston. And then once you look at the teams that are attending the Ale, trying to think of like more representative sampling. So having people from out of town has been big. And then, of course, as the college started shifting, one of the big things that happened, and I can't remember what year, 2015 maybe, the college shifted from having its own staff run the kitchen to having it contracted out to it wasn't Cisco, but it was, one of the major Aramark maybe food companies, and they ended up keeping a lot of the same staff, but it was getting processed through a central thing. And so a lot of the sort of structure and contract stuff started getting a lot more professionalized. And that was starting to happen really across the board. That liability became more and more part of the question. If we are going to have a fire pit at the Ale, who do we need to talk to? Do we need to have a permit? Does somebody have to be assigned as a fire warden, as opposed to just being like, no, we'll source it. We're not going to burn the campus down. Come on, guys. There was a lot of thought about liability around alcohol and about drinking and underage drinking in particular. And so how do we introduced a wristband process, right, when you register on the first night. There was also a shift away. There was also a shift about how we thought about people people attending, because more and more people were attending with multiple teams, right? So we're on Pinewoods and TVI, or Muddy and Orion, or lots of different things, and thinking about how you have people who are members of multiple teams and what that means and what that looks like. So yeah, I think the professionalization of a lot of aspects, not of the committee itself, but in the ways that the committee had to think about the logistics of the event.
Did this have budgetary implications?
Oh yeah,
I'm just thinking costs of insurance must have gone up and up and up for you guys.
Yep, and the cost of the food spiked.
Right, the crew. Yeah.
When the college switched from being college employees to being, again, it wasn't Aramark, but whatever it was. And then sort of trying to be like, okay, how do we as a committee financially make sure that we're sound, but also don't just immediately say like, oh, cool, the ale cost $40 more this year than it did last year, right? How did we sort of there's a financial word for it, right? Where you distribute a rising cost instead of doing this.
Advertising?
Yeah, something,
No.
right, where you make
Yeah.
it like a gradient instead of
Yeah.
immediately bumping it up $40 this year. We'll say, okay, it'll be 10, it'll go by 10 and 10 and 10 over the next 4 years, and thinking about the financial implications of that, which was really interesting. And that had never been a way that I thought that you could
Hmm.
do that. um, yeah. Did that answer that?
Yes.
Mhm.
So having done all this, does this take away for you or detract from the magic of being at the ale?
Oh, not at all. What's the, let's see. So Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist, and there are some things where he's a huge dick and you shouldn't listen to him. But one of the things that he is really thoughtful and beautiful about is he has a really beautiful book called Unweaving the Rainbow, which is basically saying that, like, knowing what's happening in the natural worlds doesn't destroy your enjoyment of it, right? Understanding that a rainbow is refraction, right? That doesn't make it any less beautiful. Or understanding that bird plumage is used in 17 different ways and has come through natural selection, and right, like, none of that destroys your enjoyment. You don't need to be ignorant of what's behind the curtain in order to enjoy a thing.
Right.
And I think part of the reason that I stepped off the committee in 2019 was because I wanted to not work as much. I wanted to enjoy it. But it was also because I wanted to, being an organizer isn't the same experience as being a participant. I don't think you can be a good organizer if you're not a participant sometimes, right?
Right.
That you need to know what the experience of an attendee is like,
Yeah.
right? Like, everybody's had the experience of, like, being too close into something on the back end to really imagine what it's like for a new person or somebody who's not deeply familiar with your system or whatever the thing is, right? And also because I feel like I did watch a lot of folks in my parents' generation get really burned out from organizing, right? Folks who ran a dance series for 30 years and then were just like, I got to get out of here. And I didn't want that to happen. So I was really happy having been on for like 10 years. And then my goal was like, yeah, I'm going to take the next 10 years off and then I'll rejoin. And it might be the Marlboro committee or it might be something else, but to sort of cycle on and off.
That's
Like,
very balanced.
yeah, I just, like, I don't know, going as an attendee is fun. It's really fun not having to wake up early. Like, yeah, you want me to carry this thing down the hill? Great. You want to call, you want to call me 2 weeks before and be like, how many plates do we order? What's the deal with the rental truck? Absolutely. Let's talk about it. But, like, I, it feels important to step off for a while and
Yep.
enjoy the fruits, and then also be there for, like, the gossip about what happened behind the scenes, but, like, not have the stress of, like, oh my God, what happened? What broke? So and so promised they would do a thing, and then, like, the day of, it turned out that nothing had happened. You were emailing the wrong police department about the permit for this. Wow, that's terrible. As opposed to, like, oh my God, it's my responsibility to fix it. Uh, so it feels really nice to be able to cycle on and off and to enjoy the thing, right? I feel like that's there's a whole separate thing about, like, it does seem strange to me that a lot of what we do as organizers, and this is not just at Marlboro, but, like, in the larger folk community, is unpaid work, even though it is a ton of work,
Mm.
and that we don't, right? Everybody is really thoughtful about making sure to pay staff, right? At dance weekends, at workshops, at festivals, right? Really trying to make sure that you're compensating people for their labor. And we just don't have a culture of doing that for organizers, that a lot of the work is volunteer. And so for me, being like, I want to have fun with the thing, right? I work hard to make sure that, like, as a community, this is a way that I can contribute, right? I I'm not the most organized person, but I'm pretty organized, and I'm happy to like do a bunch of structural stuff and talk to people and do that logistical thing. But I do also want time off to like we all do this for fun, right? Sorry, that
Where's
was
the
very
fun
long.
Right.
Very
Yeah.
long-winded.
Yeah. Well, we've asked other people who have been on the committee, like, why did you end up volunteering? Because it is a lot of work. It takes away from your pure enjoyment just to dance. And like some people do volunteer. And how do you feel about that?
Do you mean like,
What's your motivation?
oh, why do I do it? Uh, Partly because it's fun, like genuinely to do the thing. Partly because there are some things that I think need changing, and I'm not going to be one to, bitch about something and then not offer a suggestion and offer to do some of the work. Like that just feels wrong. Uh, Partly because like we exist in community and this is part of the thing. And one of the ways that I can contribute is to organize stuff, right? Like it's like we're all going to pitch in when we can, right? Like that's how it goes. And like this is a point in my life, and the past chunk of time has been a point in my life where it is really easy to contribute, right? I do have free time. I do have energy. Like friends of mine who have babies now, like, no, they're not on organizing committees. Like they're just trying to get enough sleep and make sure their kids are fed, like
Right.
no. And so yeah, it's not an obligation, but I think it is a recognition that if we want to have a thing that keeps going, we all have to put in. And so finding the ways in which it feels fun and exciting and interesting to
Being a
put
community
in.
is a participatory event.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something that should probably be cut out of the transcript, which
Yeah.
is that it's almost un-American.
Oh, it's very socialist. Right?
Yes,
I mean, I guess it's even
exactly.
more, right?
Oh, in America, we're not trained to grow up and think in terms of community. We're trained to grow up and think in terms of
Right.
independence,
Yeah.
In
self-sufficiency.
terms of like, how will this benefit me? Or, yeah, someone else will do it. Or not even realizing that something needs to be done, you
Yeah.
know? So, yeah.
Yeah.
So we
This
can
needs to be
take
done.
that
You're
out
going
of
to
the
pay me for it.
transcript.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting that those things that you talked about are community values
Mhm.
that we notice and we take on for ourselves
Mhm.
by being among people who do this.
Yeah.
You grew up, from you know, from your chronology since you were 10 years old, you have been observing people who have been giving of themselves to create opportunities for you to have
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
and learn and be part of this group.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hmm.
Anyway,
And I
so
think back to
socialist.
the interviews we had both with Tony and with Andy Horton, and how this began as a repeat of the party they had for their wedding.
Yeah.
And at its heart, it was originally a big party among friends to bring the community together and to do this thing we all loved. And that has sort of remained at the heart of this event, even as you say, there are parts that are getting more and more professionalized. It's been interesting to me. I've been privy to all the interviews now of this sort of evolution across 50 years of how that's remained such a strong central core of the essence of the ale, as other things around it have changed and been added on, and it's gotten more complex in a lot of ways. But there's still this interesting beating heart at the center of it that I think is important to everybody.
Yeah. Yes.
As you're thinking of the future, presuming that you will continue to be able to dance and take part in the ale, as a past committee member and also as a current dancer, past and current and future dancer, do you have any goals or like future visions for the ale?
Yeah. I'd like the ale to think about more tactically about accessibility, both physically and financially. I think there's always been scholarship opportunities at the ale, but they're usually work scholarships. And that doesn't, I think last year was the first year where they decoupled it from work, right? Because I don't know, folks who have a bunch of kids, right? That's both financial and time pressure. And so if you can't come, that doesn't work. Right? You don't have that option. There have been lots of events that have tried sliding scale stuff, or pay what you can. I'd like to see the ale try something in that range. I think there's something, right, as we think about, right, you brought up Tony, right? How do we make spaces that have been incredibly important to people accessible as they age and as they stop dancing, right? Mm-hmm. You can come as a guest of a team member. You can, in some cases, come as the guest of the ale committee. But how do we make the space totally actually accessible? How do we think about ways in which we can include people who aren't dancing but have given and continue to be a big part, right? And what does that look like? And then how do we explain that, right? Because I think there's always teams who are new to the ale who are like, who are those dudes, right? Who are these random folks just wandering around, right? It's not, at least at the college, it's not a public event, right? But who are these people? And explaining, having some context for that, I think is really helpful. I think there's also something, and this is something that across the folk world, I think is, it doesn't feel like there's a right answer, but how do you be welcoming to new people while also keeping the traditions alive and keeping things feeling like they are, which is, to be clear, like a not completely, but relatively spontaneous event, right? So there are a lot of parts where nobody organizes the late night singing, right? That just happens. How do you help people who have never experienced any of that not feel like, oh my God, literally everybody here knows all of the words to hundreds of songs and I don't know shit, right? Like passing out lyric sheets, maybe telling people, okay, this is the song that's going to happen. Now that starts to feel like a class. So how do you balance those things? How do you help people join in without fundamentally changing the nature of this is an event for people who know and love each other, wanting to do a fun thing together and welcome people without losing that feeling? Mm-hmm. I don't have a good answer to that, but I think there's some work to be done. I think people are thinking creatively about it. And so I think about that intentionally would be cool.
I know that in talking to some of the people, they are thinking all year about what fun things they're going to bring to the ale.
Yeah.
And that is just like the point of it all for them.
Yeah.
We talked to Mark Wilkie, a Newtown Morris, and he just gets so much joy. Unbelievable.
The history of the Newtown hijinks. We have a whole interview on that. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so interesting that was just incredible fun. And why wouldn't I work on this all year?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
have you been part of any particular traditions that you really treasure at the ale?
I really treasure trying to set up the pub in a way that is welcoming and fun and encourages community activity, right? Figuring out like, okay, what are the logistics? One of the big things that we discovered is you need an entrance at both ends, right? So that it's not just one bottleneck, right? But that people can come and go and come and go. But it still feels like a nice, tight space to be in where you feel sort of like held by the physical space as well as the people, right? Having a sing in a relatively small room is really different from having a sing in an enormous hall, right? Because then it feels sort of cavernous, and that can be a beautiful thing. But here, like having that sort of intimacy feels really nice. I think really thinking about how the late night feast or how the Saturday night feast on the fields has gone, like that potluck has gone and changed over the years. I don't know if there's a particular answer. There's not, it doesn't seem to me like there's a thing that it should be, but it's been cool watching that change and thinking about various teams. MMM has been really fun about organizing various Aunt Sally tournaments, right? And what does that look like and what does that mean? And bits of that have been really exciting. I really enjoy sort of watching how that evolves. And then Muddy River does a skit every year, which is we do the same dance. It's always the same dance, but there's some shtick. You know, one year it was roller skates, and another year it was garden gnomes, and last year it was we had a slow to fast meter. You know, like a huge like
That
6
was
foot dial,
brilliant.
and we just adjusted that. And so being like, okay, how can we do this? And it's like always a really simple gag, but having that as like a we will show up, we will as a team do a thing. Everybody knows what's going to happen, but it's just a little bit different. It's really fun.
Is there anything else you want? Yeah.
I'm also mindful of your time here, Gillian. I think we are approaching your time that you turn into a pumpkin. So,
oh, a pumpkin.
Seasonally appropriate.
Is there anything you wanted to say about the ale? You know, your experience of it, your vision of the future, or your experience on the committee that we haven't talked about yet that you really would like to make sure that is in your voice in the archive?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think it's okay, well, now I feel like I'm just going back to, you know, like college sociology class, but I feel like the ale is a really interesting liminal space between the public and the private. Which it is, right?
It
It
is.
is sort of a public space and it's also sort of a private space, and it takes a lot of intention and thinking about a lot of the interpersonal dynamics and how that all works is really fun and interesting, and takes a lot of intent. And I think I'm mostly grateful for the ways in which the ale and the community fit together, and that like being on the committee is a kind of like stewardship, you know, right? Like it's like public service, right? And I'm really grateful to have experienced that from a relatively young age from both sides, and with a lot of really kind and thoughtful people who are willing to do a lot of teaching. Yeah. So
awesome.
Yeah.
That's a lovely conclusion.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's stop recording.